A single DOT drug or alcohol violation can cost you a flat $500 to fix. Or, and this is the scary part, it can cost you $10,000 in lost wages simply because you waited 2 weeks to make a single phone call.
Oh, easily. Yeah.
So for the commercial truck drivers listening right now, we know that the moment the dust settles on a roadside violation, the panic sets in.
Ugh.
You're immediately hit with two burning questions, right? Like, how much is this going to cost me?
Yeah.
And how long is this going to take?
Right, because it creates this absolute regulatory and, well, financial maze. I mean, when you're used to mechanical breakdowns like blowing a tire where you know the replacement cost, you know the downtime suddenly dealing with a federal compliance issue just feels like you're flying blind.
Exactly. Which is why our mission for this deep dive is to completely unpack the Substance Abuse Professional, or SAP, program. We've got a massive stack of official DOT guidelines and actual provider data right here on the table.
A very thick stack.
Heavy reading. But we are going to map out the exact steps, highlight the hidden financial traps that are just draining drivers' bank accounts, and show you how to stop the bleeding and get back in the driver's seat as quickly as humanly possible.
And, the overarching theme in all these sources is that while this process feels totally chaotic and overwhelming, it is actually entirely manageable. If you understand the actual mechanics of the regulations, that is.
Right.
The worst thing you can do right now is rely on truck stop rumors or, that one guy online who claims he found some magic loophole. We need to look at how the system actually operates.
So let's start with the timeline. Because to answer how long this takes, we first have to bust the biggest myth floating around the internet right now.
Oh, the guaranteed timeline myth.
Yes. There is this widespread assumption that there is a standard, flat-rate, fixed timeline SAP program. Drivers are seeing these online ads flashing in bold letters, guaranteed return to duty in 3 days, which sounds like a total lifeline when you're losing income.
I mean, it sounds great, right? But it's a massive red flag. And frankly, it's clinically impossible under federal regulations.
Why clinically impossible?
Yeah, completely. Specifically, 49 CFR Part 40, Section 293 dictates that the SAP process must be highly individualized. Like, a provider can legitimately guarantee a quick appointment. They can say, hey, we will evaluate you tomorrow.
Sure, they can book a time.
Right, but they cannot legally guarantee a completion timeline before they've even assessed you. The DOT strictly forbids cookie-cutter programs.
Okay, I always think about it like hitting a way station.
Yeah.
You can't calculate your route, your fuel costs, or, your timeline until you actually pull onto the scale and know exactly what you're hauling.
Yeah.
Expecting a guaranteed timeline before your SAP evaluation is basically demanding the route before you've weighed the load.
That is a great way to put it. That analogy tracks perfectly with the clinical reality.
Right.
The initial evaluation is the way station. The SAP's job isn't to just rubber stamp a form so you can get back to work. Their job is to protect transportation safety. So when you sit down with them, they are digging into your specific history, your usage patterns, maybe any underlying psychological stressors. They have to determine what level of education or treatment is clinically appropriate for your specific profile, not just your specific violation.
Let's look at one of the examples from the data.
Yeah.
There's this guy, we'll call him Terry. Terry the target.
Oh, right, Terry.
Yeah, so Terry falls for one of those online ads claiming the 3-day guarantee. He pays up, thinking he's golden, and then finds out he actually needs a multi-week outpatient program. He felt completely scammed.
Which is awful, but that's exactly why those ads are predatory. The provider guaranteed the appointment, not the outcome.
So, wait, I could pop positive for marijuana, and the guy next to me pops positive for the exact same substance, but we end up with completely different timelines and assignments.
Yes. Absolutely. Two drivers can fail a test for the exact same substance, but have vastly different risk profiles. Like, one driver might have made a one-time error in judgment at a party. Right.
Yeah, just a dumb mistake.
Exactly. While the SAP's clinical interview might reveal the other driver has a chronic dependency issue that requires intensive outpatient therapy. The assessment is based on the person, not the substance.
Okay, that totally explains why comparing your program to someone else's is a complete trap. I was looking at the forums in our source material, and there's so much anger from drivers. Like this one guy, Jason, let's call it Jason's jealousy.
I remember that post.
Yeah, Jason is furious because he feels ripped off.
Yeah.
His buddy Kevin finished his program in like 5 days with a really short online class, while Jason got hit with a month of counseling for the same violation. He thinks the SAP just has it out for him.
I mean, It's a natural human reaction to feel targeted when their livelihood is paused, right? But mechanistically, the SAP is using standardized clinical criteria. They often draw on guidelines from the American Society of Addiction Medicine to gauge public safety risks.
Oh,
They are legally bound to prescribe a tailored plan. If they just gave everyone a 3-day generic video course, they would lose their credentials and potentially face federal scrutiny. So Jason needs to stop comparing himself to Kevin.
okay, well, if every single program is totally individualized, how are you supposed to actually budget for this? We have to put some real numbers to this process so you aren't flying blind.
Sure, so looking at the 2026 budgeting estimates from the sources, we can map out a baseline. A typical SAP evaluation package ranges from about $450 to $750.
But that's just for the evaluation part, right? That's just the cost of getting on the scale.
That is a very crucial distinction, yes. That fee usually covers the time of the professional assessing you. The actual education or treatment they prescribe is a totally separate expense.
So it stacks up.
It does. A basic education class might be $50 to a few $100s. But if the clinical evaluation determines you need outpatient counseling or inpatient care, that can run into the thousands. Plus, there's the return-to-duty drug test later, which is another $75 to $125.
Hold on, I have to jump in here because this feels like a glaring flaw in the system. If this is a federal safety mandate, why is the DOT letting companies wash their hands of the bill? That feels like they're hanging drivers out to dry and just letting pricing be the Wild West.
It's a point of massive frustration for drivers, obviously, but it really just comes down to statutory authority. Under Section 40.289, the DOT makes it explicitly clear that they mandate the safety process, but they stay completely out of your wallet.
They just wash their hands of it.
Basically, yeah. The federal government doesn't have the jurisdiction to dictate private payment arrangements between employers and employees. Sometimes, a union contract or a specific company policy dictates that the employer covers the cost. But more often than not, that financial burden falls directly on the driver.
Which means you really have to treat this like a major financial transaction and read the fine print. I was looking at the provider data, and price shopping can be a total trap. A lot of drivers get lured in by a low initial quote.
Oh, the hidden fee trap.
Yeah, like the case of Michelle's math mistake. She sees provider A advertising a $350 evaluation. And that looks way better than provider B down the street asking for $525.
And she chooses the $350 option thinking she just saved a couple $100.
Right. But then she finishes her required education. She goes back for her mandatory follow-up evaluation so the SAP can sign off. And that same provider hits her with another $350 bill. Suddenly, she's paying $700.
When provider B, charging $525, was actually offering a comprehensive package that included both the initial and the follow-up evaluation.
Exactly.
This is why the single most vital question you must ask a provider before handing over your credit card is, and write this down, does this quote include both the initial evaluation and the mandatory follow-up evaluation? You have to know the mechanics of what you are purchasing.
There's also a massive missed opportunity I saw in the case studies regarding how people actually pay for the treatment portion. Because this starts as a DOT workplace violation, drivers just assume the whole thing is a specialized, out-of-pocket workplace expense. But if the SAP prescribes actual counseling or therapy, that crosses over into a healthcare issue.
Yes, and that crossover is where you can save thousands. Like Samuel's case from the data.
Oh, Samuel, smart move.
Right. Samuel assumes he has to pay cash for outpatient counseling, but he calls his health insurance provider first, and he checks his company's Employee Assistance Program, the EAP. By finding a treatment facility that was in-network with his existing health insurance, he basically eliminated a massive out-of-pocket expense.
That is huge, because the difference in cost between drivers is wild. Take Adam and Brian. Both get popped for marijuana, right? Same exact substance. Adam just needs basic education. His total out-of-pocket is maybe $700. Brian's evaluation says he requires multiple counseling sessions, and his total hits like $1,800 or more.
Yeah.
It really proves your point about individualized care.
Exactly.
So we're talking about hard costs here. The $500 evaluation, the couple $100 for a class, the treatment co-pays. But the sources point out a hidden cost that dwarfs all of those actual SAP fees combined. And this one is almost entirely within the driver's control.
The sheer bleed of lost driving income.
Exactly. So what does this all mean? When you look at the data on timelines, a pretty fascinating pattern emerges. The massive delays keeping drivers off the road are rarely the DOT's fault, and they usually aren't the SAP's fault either.
No, they are overwhelmingly driver-inflicted. I mean, the largest expense in this entire ordeal isn't paying the professional. It's the wages you aren't earning every single day you remain prohibited from safety-sensitive work.
Let's do the math on that because it is an absolute income hemorrhage. Say you make $1,500 a week driving. You get your violation, you find out the SAP fee is $500, you just dig your heels in.
Like Robert from the case studies.
Yes, Robert's stubbornness. He's angry, he feels the system is rigged, and he flat out refuses to pay someone $500 to tell him that he made a mistake. So he just sits on it for 4 weeks.
And by dragging his feet for 4 weeks to avoid a $500 bill, he just cost himself $6,000 in gross income. I always tell people, time does not cure a DOT violation. The Clearinghouse database doesn't just reset because a month went by. Only active compliance moves the needle.
And then there's Angela. Angela's self-inflicted delay. She gets her recommendation on June 1st, but then she waits 20 days to even call the provider. Then she delays sending the completion certificate to the SAP.
Right, and then she goes online and complains that the process took over a month when she literally manufactured almost all of that delay herself.
It's crazy. The drivers who survive this process financially are the ones who treat the SAP process as like a hostile logistical puzzle. Take Carlos, the model driver in our data. He doesn't waste energy being mad. He books the initial evaluation the same exact day he gets the violation to stop the clock on his lost income.
He gets the recommendation, enrolls in the class the next morning, keeps his receipts, and sends his completion certificates back to the SAP immediately.
He treated the return to duty process with the exact same professional rigor he applies to driving his truck. You do the pre-trip inspection, you follow the route, you don't sit in the cab complaining about the weather,
Every gap between these steps, like the gap between the violation and the first call, or the gap between finishing the class and booking the follow-up evaluation, every single one of those gaps is a point where wages just bleed out.
Okay, so let's say you tackle that logistical puzzle perfectly. You push through, you finish the education, you do the follow-up evaluation, and the SAP gives you the green light. The natural assumption is, great, I'm done, I'm cleared, give me the keys.
Oh, man. And that assumption leads to some of the most expensive mistakes in the entire process.
Really?
Yeah, because completing the SAP evaluation is just clearing the clinical hurdle. You still have to clear the testing hurdles before you can even touch a steering wheel.
All right, this is where we need to talk about the return to duty, or RTD, drug test. Drivers see this requirement and, they try to outsmart the system to save a few bucks. We saw this with David's fake bargain.
Poor David.
He tries to save money by going online or walking into a pharmacy, buying a random $50 drug test, taking it, and handing the negative result to his motor carrier.
And the employer will immediately reject it, and they are legally required to do so. A retail drug test, or even a standard non-DOT clinic test, is completely useless here. Mechanistically, a federally regulated DOT return-to-duty test requires a very specific chain of custody. It requires a federal drug testing custody and control form, the CCF.
And it has to be processed by a medical review officer, right? The MRO.
Correct. The MRO is the independent physician who verifies the lab results. Only an MRO can officially report a negative RTD test to the FMCSA Clearinghouse.
The Clearinghouse being the federal database that flagged you as prohibited in the first place.
Exactly. A $50 pharmacy test doesn't talk to the Clearinghouse. So trying to save $30 on a cheap test just adds more days of lost income while you scramble to go back and take the federally mandated test with the proper paperwork.
Which also means you might have to deal with a CTPA, a consortium third-party administrator.
Yes, that's another big one.
Because if you don't have a current employer to manage the RTD test, say you were let go right after the violation, you often have to hire a CTPA to order the test and report the results to the Clearinghouse for you, which is, of course, another administrative fee you have to budget for.
It all comes back to understanding the regulatory machinery. You have to feed the system the exact paperwork it demands through the exact channels it requires, or the database will not clear you. It's that simple.
But the real panic usually sets in around the final phase, which is the follow-up testing timeline. I was reading through the driver reactions in the sources, and it's heartbreaking, but incredibly common. Look at Lisa's tears.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
A driver like Lisa finishes her program. The SAP informs her that she has a 2-year follow-up testing requirement, and she just breaks down crying. She literally thinks she is banned from working for 2 straight years.
This is a massive misconception, and it causes so much unnecessary despair. The follow-up testing requirement is not a suspension. The entire goal of the program is to monitor a safe return to the road. The follow-up testing happens while you are actively back to work.
Okay, so you are earning your full income.
Exactly. You are driving your routes, you're getting paid, and occasionally you will just be pulled for an unannounced test.
The regulations state you must submit to a minimum of 6 unannounced follow-up tests in the first 12 months back on the job. And depending on the SAP's clinical judgment, that testing window can actually be extended up to 5 years, right?
It can up to 5 years, but again, you are working and earning during that entire window. It's just monitoring.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The critical thing to understand is how the clock actually ticks on that timeline. And this is a regulatory trap that catches a lot of drivers who try to game the system.
Oh, you mean the broken clock loophole?
Yes, Michael's broken clock. You see drivers like Michael who do their return-to-date test, they get back to work, and they do maybe 3 months of their follow-up testing. Then they decide they're just tired of the hassle, so they take a break. They leave the trucking industry entirely and go work in construction or maybe a warehouse for a year. 12 months later, Michael comes back to a new motor carrier and says, "Hey, good news. My 12-month follow-up requirement is long gone. It expired while I was away."
And that new employer is going to pull their clearinghouse record and immediately see that the requirement is still active.
Because it doesn't expire.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Under Section 40.307, the clock on your follow-up testing only ticks during months of safety-sensitive duty. It is not based on the calendar on your wall.
I love visualizing it this way. Follow-up testing is like a shadow. It only exists when you're standing in the sun, meaning when you're actively working in a safety-sensitive DOT job. If you step into the shade, if you quit driving to go work in a warehouse, your shadow just pauses. It waits for you.
It definitely waits for you.
The second you step back into the sun and get behind the wheel of a rig, your shadow is right back attached to you, and the testing clock starts ticking again exactly where it left off.
Mechanistically, that is exactly how the FMCSA tracks it. Quitting the industry does not erase the requirement, it just freezes it in the database. If you owed 9 months of monitored driving when you left, you will still owe 9 months of monitored driving when you return, no matter how many calendar years have passed. You just cannot wait out a DOT requirement.
It is wild how many hyper-specific mechanisms there are in this system. But, when you lay them out, the path really does become clear. It removes the mystery, which removes the panic.
The regulations are dense, sure, but they are predictable. Once you understand the sequence evaluation, treatment, follow-up evaluation, RTD test with an MRO, and monitored return, you take back control of your career.
So let's bring this all together for the driver listening right now. If you were sitting there with a violation, understand that the SAP process is not just a punishment you simply endure. It is an investment you are making to restore your career eligibility.
Absolutely.
You have the budget for the real costs, not just the initial quote.
Yeah.
Ask explicitly what those fees cover. Utilize your health insurance or EAP to offset treatment costs. Avoid those cheap and fast online scams that promise a timeline before an evaluation.
And above all else, act immediately. Procrastination is the most expensive mistake you can make. Every day you wait is a day of wages you will never get back.
Right.
You cannot control what the clinical evaluation uncovers or what the SAP assigns you, but you entirely control how quickly you execute those assignments.
When the breakdown happens, you don't stare at the engine. You get to work fixing it. And, that brings up a really interesting thought to leave you with. We spent all this time looking at how the individual driver has to ruthlessly navigate this maze to survive financially. But with the massive ongoing commercial driver shortage we're seeing right now, how might the trucking industry's landscape change if motor carriers started viewing the SAP program differently?
Oh, that is a profound question for the industry at large.
Right. What if companies stopped seeing a violation purely as a punitive hurdle or an automatic reason to fire someone, and started viewing the SAP process as a critical retention tool?
Because replacing a veteran driver is incredibly expensive.
Exactly. What if more employers proactively guided their experienced veteran drivers through this financial and regulatory maze to get them safely back on the road, rather than just tossing them the DOT rulebook and leaving them to figure it out entirely on their own? And something to think about next time you see a rig sidelined on the highway.